pleased and surprised by the arrival of a set of twins, South Devons, this week, and they're doing well, and both have bonded with Mum, which is great.
The Conservatives are absolutely looking sure to get a massive kicking in the general election. They're trying to make out that there could be a coalition of chaos. I mean, what do they think the last 4 years has been, given that we started with Boris Johnson and then we had 39 days of Liz Truss and then we've got Rishi Sunak, and their poll rating is in the toilet. Every week that Sunak hangs on, the more likely his ratings are going to spiral down and the more seats they're going to lose. Brexit has been an absolute disaster for the country, and it's been a disaster for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. I hear that some of the Brexiteers are still hoping to get Boris Johnson back. They seem to think that he's going to get them out of a hole. In truth, they might need to have Jeremy Corbyn back in the Labour Party, because I think he was a massive help in 2019 in ensuring the Conservatives got 43% of the vote, which gave them a majority of 80 seats. Anyway, it's all to play for, all to look forward to, another day in Brexit Britain. We have a new president at the NFU, and his name is Tom Bradshaw. And it's interesting because things have started to change. This weekend, we have some news reports of Tom actually talking about the impact of Brexit on farming. And that's good news, I think. It shows that there is an appetite to challenge the government and those in power, and it's one of the reasons that we did exist at Save British Farming, to try and push against what is being done to us. Now, lots of people comment that, it's really bad in Europe as well, and it's nothing to do with Brexit. Well, the truth of the matter is there are enormous global challenges. The world has gone through COVID, the world has gone through the Ukraine war, and the world is going through the war in Gaza. But we are the only country that's got Brexit. We're the only country that decided to make trade with our biggest market more difficult, left the back door open for that big market to send their goods in here to undercut our goods in our marketplace, as well as deliver an unfair playing field in the UK, because the devolved nations have kept food subsidies, whereas English farmers have had theirs incrementally removed. So all of these things are actually unique to the UK, and that's why farming, as Tom Bradshaw said this weekend, is facing an existential crisis, and food security is severely under threat, because on top of all of these events, Brexit and Ukraine war, COVID and Gaza, we have had the most extraordinary weather for the last 18 months. We've had 6 months of rain, which has meant that many of us, and we weren't able to get our maize in the autumn. We haven't been able to do any drilling. What we did drill has rotted, and it's only really today that the sun has come out, but the land is still full of water. So this means that lots of farmers have not been able to, or will not be having a harvest this year. And looking forward, that means real problems for us. But the government, at the same time, having delayed the checks for imports coming via the EU to give them an advantage to undercut us and put us out of business, have now decided to bring them in at a time when food production here is very, very low, and it's even lower because the government's new agricultural policy turned farmers into park keepers and encouraged us, paid us to take, has been encouraging, it still is paying us to take land out of production. So all of these things have meant that there is a lot less British food, and there's going to be a lot less imports coming in from the European Union now that these Brexit checks are coming in. And we know that because when the checks went in for us to export to the European Union, our trade reduced and is down significantly. So going forward, we are facing huge challenges with food, and there is an answer to it. Labour are partially there. They're offering a veterinary agreement as a starter, and I'm pretty sure that once you've committed to that veterinary agreement and to not diverge from European standards, then inevitably gravity pulls you back to Europe, and Brexit cannot move our geographical location. We are in Europe, and relying on food coming from the other side of the world is just not feasible. If they'd wanted Brexit to work, really what they should have done was ramped up food production here, but they've done the opposite, which is leaving us within the realms of food insecurity, being held to ransom for food. You know, being on world markets can be a hostage for a fortune, and world food globally is under great stress because of all of these world events which I have been talking about. So what happens next? Well, we're here waiting for Rishi Sunak to call an election. We've got, you know, no choice but to put our hopes in with the thought that we might get a change to a Labour government that does something sensible, which protects Britain and ensures that we've got enough food and brings back trade with Europe, our biggest partner, and brings back prosperity again. Last week on Newsnight, there was quite a good clip about the new checks that have come in.
Post-Brexit physical checks on food and plant imports after many delays are finally here. But how much will they cost us? For some individual importers of food and plants, especially small ones, the answer is a lot. The finance director of flour company Tom Brown Wholesale told the BBC he expected the checks to cost his business around £200,000 extra per year. But what about the overall costs of the new regime? Costs that will affect not just importing businesses, but most of which are likely to be ultimately passed on to us as consumers. The government puts the total costs at around £330 million extra a year. But analysis by some trade groups, including the Cold Chain Federation, have estimated it around 10 times that, between £2 and £3 billion a year. So which is right? Well, we asked the government for the details of their own analysis, but they didn't respond. But having looked at the trade group's analysis, the difference seems to be that the higher estimates take into account not only new official charges of around £29 per imported consignment, but also a range of indirect business costs resulting from the new regime of checks, like extra staffing.
It's going to be a significant cost. I suspect it's somewhere between those estimates, but it's certainly the government's estimate of 300 million looks pretty much on the low side, and I suspect does not include all the extra time and cost that these checks are going to involve.
The government did announce at the beginning of this month that it will not, initially at least, be checking every consignment, but rather between 1 and 30% of medium risk commodities like eggs and milk. This might help reduce some bottlenecks and potential shortages on UK shelves, but inspection fees have to be paid regardless, so this doesn't remove the cost for importers. So the overall impact? Well, even new costs of as high as £3 billion a year would not be expected to change the downward overall direction of UK consumer price inflation, or even food inflation, which, as you can see here, is descending rapidly from its peak of almost 20% to 4% year on year in March. But any new costs will have some upward impact on prices relative to where they otherwise would have been. And it's a reasonable fear that some small retailers might not be able to survive as a result of these new costs, reducing the range of choice available to UK shoppers. And in terms of what can be done to alleviate these costs, well, Labour's leader Keir Starmer has argued a new animal welfare standards agreement with the EU could reduce these import frictions.
Labour's suggestion of a veterinary agreement probably reduces some of these checks. It probably doesn't eliminate them entirely. For that, you need to be part of the single market. That's what we've left.
And that is the bottom line. As was always clear, putting new regulatory barriers between our firms and our nearest and largest trading partners imposes an economic cost. What we await to find out, now the import barriers are finally here, is who precisely will bear that cost.
It would have been an act of self-harm if we'd gone ahead with it. It would have increased costs for people.
Well, the President of the National Farmers Union is here, Tom Bradshaw, as is the chair of the British Florist Association, Nikki Meader, who's a florist herself and who says these checks could cost some of her members around £75,000 each a year. And so are your members going to pass those costs on to consumers?
I think inevitably they will have to.
Why?
This is the third time that after coming out of Brexit, it's increased our prices in our industry, and we just can't keep holding on to those price increases. So inevitably it will be the consumer that suffers.
But consumers, I mean, already can't afford stuff like flowers, which you would regard as a luxury. So if you put the price up again, does that potentially mean some businesses, some florists will go out of business?
Well, florists are very passionate about what they do, and they're very honourable at serving their local communities. So they'll always find a way to adapt and change and offer something slightly different, which the consumers can afford.
OK. Tom Bradshaw, can you explain to Nikki, to our audience, why your members think these checks introduced today are actually a good idea?
Well, having a resilient food and farming system is absolutely essential, and biosecurity is a critical part of that. We see diseases like African swine fever making their way across Europe, and having secure borders and a real deterrent against illegal imports, as well as checking the legal imports coming into this country, is essential to maintain that biosecurity.
And just explain what effect African swine fever might have on farmers in this country in terms of their...
I mean, the government's own modelling suggests that the cost would be over £500 million if there was an outbreak of African swine fever here in the UK. It would make pig production probably very uneconomic, very difficult to recover from. So it would have a critical impact on our ability to produce our own food here. So I think this biosecurity is essential.
But the government says they will only be doing between 1% and 30% of consignment checks. And consignment means not just one lorry, that's all the stuff on a lorry. So that means loads of lorries won't be checked.
No, I mean, it's a deterrent, isn't it? But it's not checking everything that's coming into the country. And some of our members, particularly our horticultural producers, are saying, well, look, biosecurity is really important for us, but we already do our security checks, our biosecurity checks within our businesses. Why do we have to have the inspection point at Sevington? So what we've been asking for is the appropriate checks at the appropriate place, so that for meat products, for dairy products, it would be at the border. But for our horticultural producers, it's at the biosecure site within their business.
Can I ask you, Nikki Meader, what would it mean to your members if there are delays to some of these checks? Absolutely. For example, some of the inspections only go on at certain sites between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. at night. So if a lorry comes after that, they have to wait till the next day or travel somewhere else.
Yes, the majority of flour lorries coming into the UK come in between 9 p.m. and midnight. So that's completely outside the time for the inspection. So it is a delay in supply chain that is a worrying factor to the members when we're up against, you know, online giants that can supply a product the next day. We need the turnaround to be really quick coming through the borders, and I just don't think it's going to be now they're bringing in these extra checks. And
so if there are delays, that presumably devalues the quality of the flour. I'm not an expert in flowers.
That bride that's looking for the perfect flour.
Exactly. and so you certainly can't be putting your prices up then, can you?
No, it's very difficult. But the other difficulty is that the lorries are shared lorries. So, you know, they could have 30 independent florist flowers on that lorry. And so we've no idea whether our lorry with our order on it will be pulled over or not.
Right.
And when are we going to find out? I think that's the thing. We just don't know the answers. We need to know. And this has come into force today. Yeah. And we still don't need the answers that we need to know.
Do you mind me asking what you both voted in the Brexit referendum?
I did vote Remain, but I'm a big believer that we have to move beyond the Brexit debate.
Yes. Sure. And I think that's my feeling too. Yeah, we have to move on. We have to get on with it. We agree with the checks to stay.
To stay?
Yeah, to remain.
Yeah, OK.
But we need to move forward.
Sure. It's just interesting because certainly amongst the farming community there was some support for Brexit amongst farmers. And today is a kind of very visible cost of Brexit. Is that support still there as it was? Especially when you look at some of the free trade deals the UK's done with Australia and New Zealand.
I think you do have to think about taking back control, which was what this was all sold on, and actually border security is part of that taking back control. And the moment that we decided we were going to be a third country exporting relationship with the EU, these checks were always inevitable. They've been delayed for time and time again. The EU have been doing them for 4 years. Many of our members have suffered significantly, particularly some of our artisan cheese exporters, the cost of exports into the EU. This is just rebalancing.
Levels the playing field, yeah. But, I mean, you heard Jacob Rees-Mogg, when he was Brexit Opportunities Minister, describing these checks as an act of self-harm, and they are brought in today.
But from that biosecurity perspective, we cannot take things for granted. When we see that pressure right the way across Europe, we've got to make sure that we value a resilient food production industry here, and biosecurity is a critical part of that.
Okay.
I do disagree with these Brexit checks because I disagree with Brexit. I think we didn't need to do this far extreme hard Brexit, and we should concede that we are better off in the single market and the customs union for farming, for sure. It is a much better option. And at Save British Farming, we will continue to campaign for that to happen.